next hour, Sadat Action Biography.
We are the oldest nation, the oldest written history, 7,000 years, the oldest government. Believe this, we are very proud.
As you're driving through the streets of Cairo or any other Egyptian town and the people are standing on the side of the street and cheering you, how do you know they really mean it?
It is something that you can feel by heart. By heart. I'm a man of the street, and I can feel it.
He's got a sense of timing. He understands his public. He knows how to deal with other politicians extremely well. At the same time, though, I think we must admit he is a statesman, because he is the first Arab leader who has been able really to lead the Arab world in modern times.
I must say he's one of the surprises of Middle Eastern history. He developed a sharpness of personality and independence of vision, which contrasted with the previous image of a ceremonial figurehead. And now I think most Israelis would agree with me in thinking that he is a more formidable and serious person than Nasser.
Sadat is a dedicated Egyptian nationalist, that of course he has the Arab cause at his heart, but I would not use the word fanatic in any sense with respect to Sadat.
Well, as a wife, of course I prefer if he wasn't a president, because at least he will be with us more, and he will be as a father and as a husband with us more.
Mr. President, what would you like people to write about you after you've gone?
I should like them to write on my tomb. He has lived for peace, and he has died for principles.
For the past 1,000 years, nobody in the West has bothered very much about getting along with the Arabs. They haven't amounted to very much. In the past 12 months, however, it's become a very big matter, not far on our agenda below getting along with Russia or getting along with China. There are about 100 million Arabs in about 20 Arab countries. Though they're not united and none is dominant, the most prestigious is Egypt, because it is the most populous. It's a piece of luck for us that the president of Egypt now is Anwar el-Sadat. He has expelled the Russians from Egypt. He's shown himself amenable to negotiation, as Nasser was not. He's opened his country up to Western investment, and he's displayed an admiration for the steward of our foreign policy, Henry Kissinger. For the past 4 months, ABC's chief Middle East correspondent, Peter Jennings, has been filming Sadat's every public move and a lot of private ones. For the next hour, we present Jennings' portrait of the #1 Arab.
Anwar Sadat has been president of Egypt since the sudden death of Gamal Abdel Nasser in 1970. Since his presidency began, Egypt and Israel have fought their 4th war, and there is pessimistic expectation about a 5th. Sadat's present popularity dates back to his decision to go to war in October 1973. He is carried along on the adulation of the crowd as only the 2nd meaningful Egyptian president in his nation's long history. He is a man of many parts. Above everything, Anwar el-Sadat is first an Egyptian. He has been a passionate nationalist since his early childhood. The First World War was ending in the year of Sadat's birth. The British had helped Egypt throw off Ottoman rule, but remained on as semi-rulers themselves. The land of the pharaohs continued to be dominated by foreigners. The burial sites of the ancient kings became training grounds for British cavalry. Sadat's grandmother told him the story of Din Shwai, a village not far from his own. In 1906, British soldiers were shooting pigeons there. The villagers objected, for the birds were daily food. In the confrontation, a British soldier died. Many peasants were punished. Sadat has a private collection of these photographs. Shots of a hurried trial, more of floggings. Villagers were hanged. Anwar Sadat has never forgotten what it could mean to raise a hand against the British.
Since my early days, I felt, what does the occupation mean, the foreign occupation? What does colonialism mean? What is the real relations between us and the British in our country?
Sadat was barely a teenager when he moved with his family to Cairo. The king on the throne was not Egyptian, he was Albanian. His ancestors had ruled Egypt earlier in history. The king, Fuad, had his young son Farouk at school in England. The British supported Fuad's throne. When the king died, Farouk returned to take his father's place. Egyptians don't always love their leaders, but they usually respect and sometimes fear the office.
I remember at that day, I stood in the street. I stood from 9 o'clock in the morning up till 2 in the afternoon, waiting for him, waiting to have a glimpse of our new king. And he was very popular at that time.
In Sadat's eyes, he did not remain popular for long. The British government continued to influence Farouk as they had his father. There was little future for boys like Sadat.
The country was not ours. We have only what I call the 0.5% community. It means that 0.5% has got everything, and 99.5% has got nothing at all.
Sadat, at high school in Cairo, demonstrated against the British. He was expelled twice before graduating. Ironically, at least one contact with the British was beneficial. In 1936, the military academy, looking today much like it did then, opened its doors to Egyptian boys from the lower class. Sadat, whose father worked for a British army doctor, made application.
My father was his chief clerk, so my father sought his recommendation, and in my file you shall see that I was recommended to the military college by a senior British officer.
That must have been one of the only times a British officer recommended you for anything, wasn't it?
Quite right. They must be sorry for it.
Sadat was admitted, and so was another fervent Egyptian nationalist, Gamal Abdel Nasser. It was to be a giant step forward, the beginning of an Egyptian-trained military not dependent solely on birth or royal favor for its leadership. It was here that Sadat and Nasser became friends and decided they had much in common. They both saw the army as the way to overthrow the king and expel the British. Sadat and Nasser had no sooner graduated from military academy than the Second World War broke out. The British were fighting the Germans and Italians in North Africa. Sadat saw the war as an opportunity to hasten British defeat and their departure from Egypt. He decided to collaborate with the Germans.
We had a saying here that says, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. This is quite simple like that. We were faced by a very grave situation. Rommel has reached Alamein, and he was about to capture Alexandria and then Cairo. So we tried to contact the Germans and tell them that we want our complete independence. And even if they want us to fight for this independence with them, we are ready.
Sadat, however, was caught by the British. He lost his army commission and was sent to prison.
When you look back, Mr. President, from the perspective of history, what do you think the world would have been like if Hitler had won the war?
Terrible. Terrible. It would have been very terrible. God will never permit this. We say this here. If there is something very outrageous, we say God will never permit this.
Sadat escaped from prison and disappeared into the crowded streets of Cairo. He lived as a fugitive and took up once more with Nasser the secret movement for revolution. 2 years later, he was back in jail.
I was accused of plotting for the assassination of some politician called Amin Osman here.
You were guilty, were you not?
Well, to a certain extent, I trained those students and those young men This was my main accusation, that I trained them to use hand grenades and pistols and so. I trained them. Yes, I trained them.
After a celebrated trial, Sadat was acquitted, and by 1952, the king's days were numbered. By now, the British were occupying only the Suez Canal zone, but Egyptian opposition even to that was mounting. 1952 was a landmark year. On the 25th of January, British soldiers surrounded an Egyptian police post in the canal town of Ismailia. They commanded the police to lay down their arms and leave the British area. The Egyptians refused. The fort was leveled. More than 50 Egyptians were killed. And the next day in Cairo, the mob took its revenge. Nasser and Sadat saw in this Black Saturday the public sentiment needed to assure their success. The revolution date was set for July, only 6 months away. On the day Nasser decided to strike, his lieutenant Anwar Sadat was serving in the Sinai. Nasser ordered him back to Cairo. When Sadat arrived at the station, a curious mix-up occurred.
Gamal didn't receive me, and this was not his custom at all. So I thought, nothing will happen today or tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. I said, I may go to the open-air cinema tonight and enjoy myself, and then after that, in the morning, I'll see Gamal.
While Sadat was at the movies, the coup began. Sadat finally caught up with it, and he was soon thoroughly involved.
I went to the Prime Minister and delivered the ultimatum to him. He was shocked, believe me, because up till this moment he didn't know that we were going to dethrone the king at all. He was shocked and received me like this. I told him yes. He said, are you powerful enough? I told him yes. Go and deliver it to the king. He must leave by 6 o'clock this evening.
The young officers were unsure whether their youth would work against them. Protectively, they appointed an older man, General Mohammed Naguib, as the man the public would see as their leader. Sadat remained in the background. Naguib, for all the ceremony, had no power. Nasser made all the decisions. Newsreels of the day were therefore slightly misleading.
From Cairo come these first authentic pictures of the bloodless coup by which the army took over control of Egypt. It was the end of the king's attempt to maintain power. Troops in the street were the first indication of the change to most people, until with the broadcasting station seized, it was announced that General Naguib, the commander-in-chief whom Farouk refused as war minister, had taken control, and the army were ordered to guard strategic points. The declared aim was to stop corruption. Struck at the top, and General Naguib shows the abdication papers signed by King Farouk in favor of his 7-month-old son. Meantime, from Alexandria, the royal yacht Marusa sails with the ex-king and the infant king for Capri. To the ordinary Egyptian, the change is welcome. What the change will mean to the rest of the world, we have yet to see.
The impression you had in Alexandria Harbor the night that the Marusa sailed King Farouk into exile?
Relax, really.
Was the coup easier than you expected?
Very easy, yes.
The new government, the Revolutionary Command Council, met legally for the first time.
And we were not prepared at all, either to form the government or to do anything at all. We were not prepared at all. Believe me, we were in a mess. What are we going to do? We are responsible now after the country, after Egypt.
By 1956, General Naguib had left government altogether. Nasser, now president, was to be Sadat's boss for the next 14 years. Egyptian nationalism did not wane under Nasser. If anything, it increased. Nasser appealed to the United States for arms and was turned down. He bought them from the Soviet bloc. Washington, in return, refused to provide the money it had promised for the badly needed Aswan High Dam. The Russians offered to pay. The Egyptians readily accepted. The American failure to provide the money led to the first serious Soviet penetration of Egypt. Sadat still blames the American Secretary of State John Foster Dulles.
We didn't like him here because he has never understood us. He has taken everything always black and white. Either you are with America or you are not with America, or you are an enemy of America. I don't like this attitude because there is a psychological element in the whole thing. We have our pride. We want to be friends with America, but we have our pride, and we don't want to be a puppet government, or we don't want to receive orders from Mr. Dulles. But we can be friends. He didn't understand this.
Sadat stepped into the shadows for the years of the Nasser regime. He did not really re-emerge until one night in December of 1969. Nasser, concerned about his own death and the perpetuation of his policies, named Anwar Sadat his vice president.
And he said, well, if I happen to die, I want you to continue, and I don't want anyone to humiliate this country again.
Did you take that as a pretty clear indication that he wanted you to be the next president?
Quite right. He never said this before.
Sadat, Action Biography will continue after this message.